Hello there, welcome to Underlords Universe, and I'm Brian, or Mr. Make Believe. This is my brother and partner in crime, Brent, or Man of a Thousand Faces. We like to do a lot of creative stuff. We kind of a part of a broader creative endeavor that does music and stories. A little bit more on that at the very end. But right now, we're here to talk about one of the things that inspires us to do things in the world of creativity, and that is to discuss the Kiss solo albums. We had done a multi-part series on the Kiss catalog. I can't remember how many episodes it is off the top of my head, but we divided the Kiss catalog up into a bunch of different eras and discussed and then ranked each of those eras, and then we did an aggregate total episode. So if anybody's interested in checking that stuff out, I'll put links below to that. And what we're going to do today is we're going to discuss the Kiss 1978 Kiss solo albums in uh, well, I can't say chronological order, so we're going to do it in alphabetical order. Criss, Frehley, Simmons, and then Stanley, and as they would be in your phone book. So that's the way we're going to do. We're going to do a brief discussion of each of the albums, high points, low points, etc. And at the end, we're each going to do kind of simultaneously our countdown of those four albums from least favorite to favorite. Um, Now, below, I'm also going to hyperlink through, I'll put links. So if anybody's out there and wants to jump ahead to any part of the discussion, you can do so. And Brent, I got my notes ready. Do you have your notes ready?
Ready. A lot of
Oh,
notes are up here, but yeah, I'm ready to go.
yeah. Okay. So we are going to start our discussion with Peter Criss's 1978 solo album. Well, I guess they're all 1978, of course. But these came out. Well, do you remember what the release date of these?
September 18th, I
Okay,
believe.
so September of 78, and Double Platinum had come out earlier in 78, I believe, as well, correct?
Yeah, April of 78.
April, which is kind of interesting as a side note because Double Platinum on the inside has the four kind of same images, but just kind of from an embossed kind of
Mm-hmm.
point of view. But
Yeah.
um, okay, so Peter Criss, obviously this album kind of gets slagged by a lot of the fan base. Um, the one thing I want to say going in, and I'll just kind of lead the with my thought here. The this is a really difficult thing for me to rank these four albums because they are number one, I actually like all of them pretty
Yeah.
evenly. I'm just going to give that away. Second of all, um, I I I tend to gravitate towards the solo albums because, with maybe the exception of Ace, because they're so unkiss-like. There's it's different, and I like that. I've always liked that about the solo albums. If I wanted to listen to a Kiss album, I just put a Kiss album on. So, so there's that. So, so this was difficult for me in that respect, but that also then brings in our rating system. And, a lot of people out there just, they'll rate albums or whatever using whatever criteria they want, and that's fine. But we use in our system, we rate songs on a scale from 1 to 5, and then divide by the total number of songs for a score. And that's how we end up ranking the albums. The reason we like doing that, folks, is because it kind of creates surprises for ourselves along the way, um, rather than just kind of going off the cuff. So in in looking at Pete's album, I gotta say, even though I really like Peter's album, I'm a little contrarian in that regard. Um, I'm going to admit, I almost think it's more of a Stan Penridge album than a Peter Criss album because I don't see a lot of evidence throughout the history here that Peter himself is really that much of a songwriter. So I kind of tend to think of it as a Stan Penridge album because Stan Penridge wrote all the songs, covers aside, but he co-wrote all the stuff in there. Um, so your initial impressions of Pete's album, comments, thoughts?
I'm like you. I really like Peter's album. Well, I like all of them. And I'm also like you. I like them because they're not necessarily um, well, they're not Kiss records. They are, but they're not. They don't sound
Right.
like Kiss. Maybe with the exception of Ace's record, although some people think Paul's record sounds a lot like Kiss. Um, I think all the records are very honest representations of where the guys were at this point, and where the band was at this point. And I like Peter's record because it's very much Motown. It's like,
Kind of
it,
It's like Bob Seger.
yeah, yeah. Um, it's him doing what he really wanted to do, and I think it's a really good representation of that. And I think we all know Peter's not really much of a writer. He liked to call himself a composer. We know he didn't really write Beth and all that stuff, but um,
Right.
the the songs on this record, I think they really showcase a diversity um, that you don't normally see on a Kiss record. And clearly Kiss is not doing Motown stuff, although Paul is doing the his most recent the Soul Station
Yeah.
stuff might be similar to Peter's record. But I know I'm kind of rambling and babbling, but for the most part, I think Peter's record, and I've always liked Peter's record. I've never not liked it. I think it's actually, if you look at his career outside of Kiss, and maybe we'll do this at some point, looking at all the other albums that these guys have done, it's probably the best record that he's done as a solo artist, if you want to look at it that way. I mean, I would probably go so far as to say, I don't know if the numbers would bear that out, but when you look at Out of Control and Let Me Rock You and
Hmm.
some of the stuff he did later on in his career, I'd wager a guess that this would rank as his best record. Um,
Well, yeah, and I think we'll have to really do that at some point. Just taking a look at the Peter Criss solo catalog for
yeah,
sure. Um,
I think is an interesting side. I believe Peters was the only record of the four that had two singles. I think the other guys just had one single each. I think Peter had two singles,
I
which is weird. It's weird.
Yeah. And also related to that, in terms of like the writing, Stan Penridge and Peter Criss wrote 6 of the 10 songs on this record. So, there's, because, you have like, Tossed and Turnin', which is a cover. You got Vinny Poncia. I'm never sure if I'm pronouncing his name correctly.
You are. But
But who's the producer of the record? He, is one of the writers on You Matter to Me, etc. But Stan Penridge plays a lot of the guitar on this, which of course Stan Penridge is, one of the original co-authors with of Beth, and he was in Peter's band. He was in Lips,
I believe
or was
so.
he
Yeah,
in Chelsea? I have to double
one of
check
those.
on that. But
One
yeah,
of them.
but
Yeah.
he predates Peter's time in Kiss. So and to that extent, I actually think it's kind of cool because you get like this, you know, a little bit of a taste of what Peter and his previous collaborations were like, um, and they would end up later on doing the Penridge Criss Penridge Alliance, which didn't do any recordings as far as I understand, but the
And of
album,
course,
yeah,
Vinnie Fonsi would go on to produce Dynasty and Unmasked, which is we've talked about those records in previous episodes. But so there's
right.
further Kiss links. And interestingly enough, Peter didn't really participate much in Dynasty and not at all on Unmasked, but Vinny was for those records.
Right, but they got the producer who produced Peter's solo album, right? So yeah, I also wanted to say I think it's kind of interesting. Steve Lukather
Yeah,
plays some guitar on the record. He plays the guitar solos on That's the Kind of Sugar Papa Likes. He also plays on the guitar solo on Hooked on Rock and Roll. And oddly enough, Alan Schwartzberg plays drums on That's the Kind of Sugar Papa Likes, Easy Thing, and I Can't Stop the Rain. And of course, he also plays on Gene's solo album, and he ends up playing on
on
Music from the Elder, as well as Odyssey. I think he plays on Odyssey as well. So those are just some kind of little bits about who's on the record, and but I think the album. I again, I know a lot of people don't like this record. We've had our friend Travis on. He can't stand this record. He thinks we're crazy for like. I've always liked this record. I think one of the reasons why kind of has to do with when you get into Kiss. if you listen to people that got into Kiss that are a little bit older than us, someone like say Mike Portnoy. Well, I know that he's commented on these albums before. And if you're a fan when Dressed to, excuse me, yeah, when Dressed to Kill comes out, or you're a fan when Rock and Roll Over comes out, and then by the time 78 rolls around and the solo albums are coming out, and you get these four solo albums, Peters might really throw you for a loop because it's totally left field. But I got into Kiss through you, basically, and our neighbor, around what I was 9 or 10,
Yeah, eight,
and
9, 10, yeah, early
and
'80s.
so it's kind of like there's already this kind of broader palette. You can already look at their catalog and go, oh, they've done a lot of different kinds of things. Where there's a little bit of disco here in Dynasty, there's a little bit of the heavy metal stuff with Creatures, there's this or that, and so I think I was just more open um to just whatever. It's like, okay, I heard Pete's album is really different. Well, how is it different? You're kind of going in already knowing it's different. So I think that helped, at least for me. And when you're 9 or 10 years old and you have that kind of an introduction to Kiss, it's like, and when you're that age, it's like, but they can do no wrong,
Of course. Yeah.
right? Um, so it's like an automatic acceptance a bit. Now, has that clouded my judgment of the record? Maybe, but it's the way I see the record.
Right.
So it is what it is. I mean, I still really like it. But I do think the second half of the album is the stronger half. I think it starts off good. It's a good record, solid record. But then I think it really heats up with side two. So I really think my favorite songs on the record are really the entirety of side two. I think Easy Thing is great. I love Rock Me Baby. I love the groove in that song. It just it just grooves.
Hmm.
And there's a swing, People talk about Peter's drumming and there's a swing in there. There's a real swing in Rock Me Baby, um, as well as Hooked on Rock and Roll.
Oh yeah.
And I think I Can't Stop the Rain is a fantastic, ballad way before the era of like, power
Yeah.
ballad. So it's not
Yeah.
it's a ballady song, but it's not a power ballad song. And I think it's fantastic. I love side two. I like side one. I love side two.
Okay. Well, let me ask you a couple questions then.
Sure.
What if you had to pick one track off the record and say this is my favorite track, and then one that's probably my least favorite? What would those be? And then I want you to talk a little bit. Give me your impressions of, because up to this point, if Peter got a song to sing on a Kiss record,
Hmm.
Ace had just only done Shock Me. Um, Now we get full records with these guys singing every song, which is new.
Yeah.
So talk about again your favorite song, least favorite song, and then give me your impression on Pete's vocal performance on this record. What are your thoughts?
Okay. So first Pete's vocal performance, do that. I think he sounds great. We know from people like Bob Ezrin, which obviously he didn't produce this, but in recording like Beth for Destroyer, Bob Ezrin talked about how many takes it took, and then he'd have to kind of Frankenstein and cut and paste to get a take that was all in pitch because Peter's not known for having great pitch, but he has a great quality to the timbre of his voice. The sound of his voice is so appealing, kind of that raspiness. So just as a listener putting it on, um, I think he sounds great on the record. As far as like least favorite song, it's gonna be any given day, it'll be You Matter to Me or Tossed and Turning. It's not that I dislike them. I just think uh You Matter to Me, the backing vocals, a little on the goofy side, but I mean, it still has its charm. And of course,
Yeah.
Tossed and Turning because it's a cover. And not just because it's a cover. I mean, it's okay. It's a fine song, but it's nothing that just absolutely blows my mind. So those
Right.
would be my least favorites. But if right now I'd probably say Tossed and Turning, my least favorite. And as far as favorite, that's gonna be tough. I'm gonna say, gosh, it's really between Rock Me Baby, Hooked on Rock and Roll, and I Can't Stop the Rain. And that would depend on my mood, right? So if I'm in that kind of mood for I Can't Stop the Rain, I'd say I Can't Stop the Rain. Today, I'm going to say Hooked on Rock and Roll. So
Okay.
I'll say my if I had to pick one, Hooked on Rock and Roll, and one of the lessers, Tossing and Turning. How would you answer your own question?
I think his voice on this record is phenomenal. It's probably his best vocal performance, regardless of how he was recorded. Gene back in the day has said, and I think he's out there saying that Peter of the four of them had the best voice, but he didn't know how to control his voice.
Yeah, I've heard
Going
him
to
say that.
going to what you said about he wouldn't sing in pitch and he had trouble just controlling what he was doing vocally. So I don't care how they got the vocals down. I think he sounds phenomenal on this record. Um, so that I think we both agree with that. In terms of my least favorite track, it's always been Tossing and Turning. Um, I, it's not like I dislike the song. I just find it's just not that interesting. It
Hmm.
was interesting, watching them or seeing versions of them playing it live on the Dynasty tour. That was a little bit more interesting, a little bit weird, but more interesting. And I'm with you. My favorite songs on the record have always been Hooked on Rock and Roll, I Can't Stop the Rain, and also Don't You Let Me Down, which I think is a fantastic song. Um, but I Can't Stop the Rain has to be my favorite. If I had to pick a second favorite, it would be Hooked on Rock and Roll. But I Can't Stop the Rain would be my favorite. Um, I want to make one ridiculous comment.
Hmm.
You're a kid and you hear some of these lyrics. These records didn't always come with lyric sheets, and we didn't have the internet. You could like go find what the lyrics were. So with "I'm Gonna Love You" when we were kids, I always wondered what Orcam Shine was. When it's like rain or come shine, I always wondered
Yeah,
what's Orcam Shine? What's
yeah. Well,
that?
rain, Orcam shine.
Shine.
What's Orcam shine?
I don't know. So that when I was doing this, I'm like, oh yeah, rain, Orcam Shine. So I'm like, what's Orcam Shine? When we were kids, that's what I thought it was.
Okay.
Rain, Orcam Shine.
Well,
Okay.
okay, to that point, when we were kids, I didn't know what a Victrola was.
I thought it was bitch of a needle for
Not
a while.
exactly. I thought I was vaccinated by with a bitch of a needle, like it's like a really big needle or something, and it's like
Yeah, like
then you
yeah,
then you learn it's a Victrola, and it's like, oh, that makes
oh,
a little bit more sense.
exactly.
Yeah.
Like
Um,
I give Pete's album a solid thumbs up. I've always liked this record a
yeah.
lot. We're gonna, as we get into the episode further, we're gonna tell people not only how we rate these albums, but where these albums fall in the Kiss catalog if we were gonna rate
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. By the way, I
it.
also mentioned it mentioned that Alan Schwartzberg played on this, and he also played on Gene. I believe Alan Schwartzberg also played, he'd done some work with Peter Gabriel as well as Alice Cooper and Pat Travers. So, the guy has a resume apparently. So,
Good.
yeah. Any other thoughts on Pete before we move along to well, I mean, we don't necessarily need to hit every single song, although I'm sure we probably could.
No, I mean, we can do like we
Yeah.
do usually highs and
Highs and
lows.
lows, yeah, yeah. Highs and
And
lows.
again, I don't. There's no real low point on any of these records for me. I gave nothing on any of these records less than a three. Everything was a three or higher. So
Oh, I can't say that. I can't
we'll
say that, but we'll get to that. We'll get to that. I guess if we're going alphabetically by last name, I guess Soul Ace Frehley would
I
be
guess
next,
it would
correct?
be. It would be.
I
Yeah.
cannot get my notes here. Here we go. Frehley, Ace Frehley.
We just saw Ace not too long ago.
We did. Yeah. On his 10,000 volts tour, which
Right.
we will also at some point be doing a an episode on the Ace Frehley solo albums,
We
and
will.
I would include Frehley's Comet in there along the way. I mean, it's kind of so. Um, okay, Ace Frehley. Just just like with Peter and the other two, I like all these albums. I listened to the Ace Frehley album for reasons that are different than the others. Um, everybody knows Ace's album is like the most Kiss-like of the records. And if I'm in the mood for a Kiss album, I'll go to a Kiss album. If I'm in the mood for Ace Frehley Kiss, I'll go to this because it's great. I mean, how do you deny how great this album is? Having said that, um, it's weird though because as great as it is, there are moments on some of the other albums that have a little bit more emotional punch for me than most of the songs on Ace's album. It doesn't mean I like them less necessarily, but I can point to songs on Gene's, Peters, and Ace's, or excuse me, Gene's, Peters, and Paul's that have a little bit more of emotional tug for me than pretty much anything on Ace's record. Um, that doesn't mean that they're better. It's just a different kind of thing. So,
It's
um,
interesting. Interesting. I think as we get into this, talking about this record, I have a comment or two on that because I hadn't really thought about it in that way, but that's an interesting way to look at it.
yeah,
So,
well, like just for example, I mean, Peter's album. Just to make one more comment about Peter's. Peter's album used to be one of those albums I would put on, like at school, like at night, going to sleep. I'd put headphones on. Put on Peter's album. And by the time I got to I Can't Stop the Rain and everything, it's kind of
mhm.
in a certain zone. Um, I didn't really do that as much with Ace's album. Ace's album was more of a, put it in while you're driving the car kind of an
I
album.
get that.
So, um yeah, having said that, I think that it's probably Ace's album is the most consistent straight through.
I
So
would agree with
in
I would agree.
that sense, you can make an argument that it's the best of the four albums. It's the most consistent start to finish. Um But given our system, that isn't necessarily the way things always work out. So we'll see. Um, because it's so consistent, it's really, really difficult for me to pick high and low points on this. I can probably say "Speeding Back to My Baby" is my least favorite song on the record. That's
Okay.
probably that, or New York Groove. And I'm not
Okay.
saying that just to be contrarian. I mean, first, it's a cover. It was written by Russ Ballard, who was in Argent. Um, I think the band that did they were called Hello.
That's right.
Okay. But um and I like New York Groove. I like it just fine. I do tend to prefer pretty much any live version to the
Especially with
studio.
Eric, especially with Eric on drums because he would
Oh
put in
yeah.
Phil. Peter just played it straight. Just
Eric,
for
yeah, Eric Carr. Yeah.
I would put in, yeah, put in Phil's. Yeah, I
Yeah.
agree.
And and because of that, so Speeding Back to My Baby from as far as the originals on the album and New York Groove, those two songs are probably my least favorite songs on the record. Again, I still like them just fine. I think but they're not the high points for me. So, what about you? What would you say is the lower point?
My least favorite song, and I still gave it a three, is Ozone.
Okay.
And primarily because I just the chorus, and it's just hearing Ace go, oh, zone. It's just kind of is it's a little bit, I don't want to say annoying, but it's kind of like I like the music in Ozone much better than the vocal, especially in the chorus. And then the lyrics and the verses are pretty cringeworthy. I mean,
Oh yeah.
it's not, yeah, it's just it's a little bit TMI. It's
Well,
just, I
and
mean, it's honest. It's him being an
yeah.
honest representation of where he was at this point. But
It,
Ozone has never really been one of my favorite tracks on the record. But I still like it. I just don't like it as much as the other
well,
songs.
to that point, Ozone, I think, is also a bit on the monotonous side.
It is, with the
It just
exception of there's the break in the middle is kind of cool.
the
Isn't there a
break in the
break?
middle is great, and I love the fact that you can hear that acoustic guitar,
Mhm.
prevalent in the mix, despite the fact that it's still an electric,
Right,
rock song.
right.
You mentioned the scoring on this. I actually gave Speeding Back to My Baby a three. I gave New York Groove a 3.5, but I
Okay,
also gave Ozone a 3.5. The reason I didn't name check that as one of the lower ones is just because of those three, even though it is a bit monotonous, I like the tonality of it and the guitar mix with that acoustic is to my mind would edge that out a little bit. So, um,
yeah,
but
I like
I
that.
can see where you're coming from with that.
Yeah, I like the music. I like the riff. I do like the acoustic in the mix. I just the vocal and the lyrics. I'm not really a lyric guy as much as a melody person. Melody is more important than the lyric, but the lyrics are just not good on that song.
Yeah.
Uh, just for full disclosure, I gave "Speeding Back to My Baby" a 3.5, which would be
Hmm.
my second least favorite song on the record.
Huh. So we're kind of aligned in that.
Yeah. In terms of
Um,
favorites, for me, it's "Rip It Out," and then I gave that a 5. I give "Snowblind" a 5, and then I give "Fractured Mirror" a 5. Now, my favorite's a "Rip It Out" and "Fractured Mirror," but I'll go with a song with a vocal, and I'll go with "Rip It Out" as my favorite song. But I want to say something about "Fractured Mirror"
yeah.
because you talked about how there may not be a whole lot of emotional stuff, where you might like something on one of these other albums, and Ace is not so much for an emotional attachment, or because it maybe doesn't have an emotive presentation in the song or whatever. I find, and maybe you do too, I find "Fractured Mirror" to be extremely emotional. I just, and I've heard people comment about the song and say, "Oh, it's really just there's not much there. He could have done so much more with it." And I just find it to be a brilliant piece. What he did guitar wise on that song, and the tones that he got from the guitar, the
A lot of layering.
a lot of layering, a lot of really playing from him that we hadn't heard before. And Kiss wasn't known for doing instrumentals. And I find this to be a beautiful instrumental piece and kind of haunting in a way, sad. Um, and it's a long piece, but it doesn't feel long when you listen to it. When I listen to it, it's like, oh, I mean, it's already starting to be over with, but it does have an extended intro and an extended outro. But I really, really, really love "Fractured Mirror." I think it's a phenomenal song. So,
Um, I, it's interesting. I mentioned Mike Portnoy a moment ago, because he's been on a channel where he commented on these solo albums, and he made an interesting point at one point. And I made note of this way back when I wrote these notes out. He said that Fractured Mirror kind of has there's if you consider like Prodigal Son from Iron Maiden,
yeah,
or You Can't Kill Rock and Roll from Ozzy,
yeah.
that you can kind of almost hear the influence of Fractured Mirror maybe on some of those things. Maybe not the influence, because it's hard to say if those you know players would have you know I don't,
No, the
but there's
guitar
there's a similarity. Yeah.
similarity is the hard part. Yeah,
Yeah. Um, Also, of course, it's interesting because, both Will Lee on bass and Anton Fig on drums, uh, I think I'm, I think they both went on to play in Dave Letterman's band.
I think you're right.
And of course, Anton Fig goes on and plays on Dynasty, Unmasked, and in Frehley's Comet as well. So, um, I I always the high points on this album for me. I mean, I agree. Rip It Out, honestly, I mean, how do you go? It's a great
It's
opener. It's a great song.
amazing.
But also, I'm in need of love.
I give that a 4.5. I almost gave it a 5.
Yeah,
I quite like that song. That song is weird but so cool.
I
That guitar riff is so cool.
yeah, I love the middle section of it. Um, so I'm gonna go with least favorite today is gonna be I'm actually gonna say New York Groove, and favorite is I'm in need of love. So
Okay.
yeah.
What are your thoughts about the production? Eddie Kramer produced the record. I mean,
Yeah,
sonically, how would
yeah,
you?
I mean, it sounds, it's like you put on Rock and Roll Over, you put on Love Gun, you put on Ace's album, you can hear a similarity, sonically there. Um, you can hear, it's almost like you can hear that the producer and the guitarist, work well together. So, um, yeah, I think it's a very, it's a very Ace rock Les Paul sounding album.
It,
So
it's the heaviest rock. It's the heaviest of these records for sure. Wouldn't you agree?
yeah, oh yeah, yeah,
The
for sure.
heaviest record. It has an incredible drum sound. I mean, the drums
Yeah.
on this record, amazing.
Hmm.
Bass is playing is, you know, I also like to kind of look at these records and say which track or tracks would have been interesting to hear Kiss do from one of these, from one of these records. And
Oh,
I
you
could
know,
hear
you know
I
what?
could,
Let's save that. That's a really good point. Let's save that for at the end before we do the ranking.
okay.
Okay. Because I'm gonna just yeah, that's a really because we didn't raise that with Pete. So
Well,
let's
and I
save
mean,
that.
yeah, and obviously they did some of these songs on tour, but I'm just saying,
Yep.
not that,
But
not
right, let's just come back to that. That's a really good question. And I'm
okay.
just gonna make a note, like as we go through the rest, I'm just gonna make a note of which ones I would have.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So we are I don't know, anything else you want to say about Ace's album at this point?
No, I'd say it's a great album, and if you're not familiar with it, I would encourage people to, as I would all these, check them
Well,
out.
I would assume if somebody stumbled across this, it's probably because they do know it, but yeah, you never know. Okay, Gene. I obviously Gene's is the most eclectic of all four of the solo albums. It's the most star-studded, or what he hoped to be star-studded. Um, he couldn't get the Beatles, so he got Mitch Weissman, who played the role of Paul McCartney in the Beatlemania, which is interesting because Mitch Weissman, who does backing vocals on songs like "See You Tonight," he's also on "Always Near You," "Nowhere to Hide." He's on Mr. Make Believe, but he also ends up being a co-writer on some of the songs on Animalize,
Hmm.
which is just kind of interesting given how vastly different Animalize is to Gene's solo album.
Yeah.
But anyway, you also get some players on Gene's album. Jeff Skunk Baxter from Steely Dan plays on it. Donna Summer is on it. Jeff Baxter, Skunk, he's on Burning Up with Fever along with Donna Summer. He's on See You Tonight.
Joe Perry.
Um, who?
Joe Perry.
Oh, Joe Perry. Yeah, Joe Perry did the solo. What did he play? He played.
I think it's See You in Your Dreams. Maybe.
Yeah, I think you're right there.
Shares on there. Shares on Living in Sin.
Shares on Living in Sin. Yeah. Um, it's yeah.
I think he wanted
But
the Beatles.
Bob,
I think Gene wanted the Beatles to be on the record, but that couldn't
well,
happen.
yeah, I just said that. He couldn't get the Beatles, so he got Mitch Weissman, who played Paul McCartney on Beatlemania. Yeah. Bob Seger. It's
Hmm.
interesting because I think Peter's album has a bit of a Bob Seger feel to some of the songs. And yet Bob Seger's actually on Gene's album. He's on Radioactive and Living in Sin.
And Bob Seger had opened for Kiss prior to
Yeah.
70. So
Yeah. Yeah. So, it's an interesting record because it's so eclectic, so weird. Um, but to me, again, that's the charm of it. It, the two albums that would really kind of get me in a different headspace as a kid would be Peter's album and Gene's album. Gene's was like going on this weird carnival ride,
mhm.
and so my least favorite song on Gene's record is probably "Living in Sin," though.
Really,
Yep, it's I do like it. It's a bit goofy though. I mean, and it's
that's
supposed to be goofy, but I still give it a three. I think it's a solid song. I like it. I just think I like pretty much every other song on the record, either slightly more or quite a bit more. But yeah, so I'm going to say low point is Living in Sin. What would you say is the low point?
um, probably When You Wish Upon a Star, but if not that, True Confessions. I've never really been a big fan of True Confessions. So either one of those, I give both of them a three.
Okay.
I gave Tunnel of Love a three too, but I think I like that more than True Confessions or When You Wish Upon a
It's
Star.
interesting. I gave True Confessions 3.5. So I just barely above, what you're thinking. Um, when You Wish Upon a Star, I know, some people hate that, but to me, a lot of this stuff is about context and, just knowing Gene's backstory and knowing what, what the lyric in that song meant to him
Mhm.
as an immigrant, who didn't speak English when he first came here as a kid, and th that whole just absolute belief to his core in the American dream, which of course he'd believe it because it happened for him, right? But it, it's real to him. So I can't knock the guy for
No,
that.
no,
And at
no.
the same time, you figure, I mean, what a gutsy move to put that on his album, you know?
Mhm.
Um, so I know Gene gets a lot of flack from a lot of people, maybe for good reason. I'm not here to judge them, judge some of the criticisms of him, but at least on that score, I think he kind of showed some true colors that were pretty good, pretty nice colors. So I actually think that's not, I wouldn't say a high point on the album in the sense that it's like, my favorite song or anything, but I think it has a kind of a unique element because of the context.
Yeah,
But
I don't dislike it. I just don't like it. I like the other songs better,
mhm.
but I like it for those same reasons. That's why I like it, and that's why I
Yeah.
would never say I don't like it
Do
because
you how do you what do you think of it as an album closer?
I think it's a great album closer.
Okay. Yeah.
I think it's especially after the punch of "See You in Your Dreams," which I think is far superior to the version on "Rock and Roll Over."
I was gonna ask you about that because I don't know this for certain, but my gut tells me that there's a lot of Kiss fans that would prefer the version on Rock and Roll Over. But I agree with you. I think that the version on Gene's solo album is better. I think it has a more energy.
It
Uh,
has more energy. It has a guitar solo. It has female backing vocals, which are great. It's got more lyrics. It's got an extra verse.
yep.
It's great.
Yeah.
It's a great.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, oh, Rick, by the way, Rick Nielsen played guitar on See You in Your Dreams.
Okay, so I got that
Good
wrong.
trick. Yeah. Yeah.
I know Joe Perry's on here somewhere.
Um,
I know he does a
he
solo on.
is. He's on there. So I just can't think. Oh, he plays guitar on Tunnel of Love.
Okay.
Yep.
And Gene does a lot of guitar on this record, but doesn't play much bass, or maybe no bass. I mean, I know he does. I think he did all the acoustic guitar.
Cor correct. The bass was by a guy named Neil Jason, who had played with Paul McCartney, Billy Joel, and Hall and Oates.
Yeah. So Gene kind of stretching out. Peter didn't play all the drums on his record. Ace with his record was basically him and Anton Fig, and then Will
Yeah,
Lee.
yeah. Will Lee played a few bass,
Ace
but a
played
lot.
bass. Here you have Gene, and on Paul's album, Paul brought in people like Bob Kulick. But Ace was there was, relatively speaking, a small group of people that worked on his record. With these others, they're really collaborative efforts, and Gene's probably the most in
Yeah.
that.
Well, and that if it depending on how you define what a solo album is, in that sense, Ace is the most solo.
Yes.
Um,
So what's
Compositionally and also in terms of the performances.
So
Um,
what would you say your favorite track or tracks are on Gene's record? And then let's talk a little bit about the production. How do you think this record sounds compared to the other three?
my favorite, a lot like Peter's, this album is a side two album for me. I think Always Near You, Nowhere to Hide, into Man of a Thousand Faces, and Mr. Make Believe, into See You in Your Dreams, follow the closing out with When You Wish Upon a Star. I think that is a one, two, three, four, five punch that is just that just takes the listener, at least this listener, just on a real just mental escapist kind of journey. I love that. And I think in some of those songs you really hear Gene's kind of Beatles-esque
Mm-hmm.
influence. And I just love it. So it's really, really hard to pick. But since I'm going to pick, I'm going to go with the with Mr. Make Believe as evidenced by what I didn't put
Right,
Brian in there. I put Mr. Make Believe. So for
right,
my name today. So that's yeah, I'm gonna go with Mr. Make Believe as the favorite song on the record if I had to pick.
right.
And right now, just so you know, my dog is getting into my pile of laundry.
Hey,
She's
I
making
wonder what
herself
her favorite
comfortable.
song. I wonder what her favorite song would be.
I don't know, but she's
I
really nesting in my laundry right now. But I
have
guess
a feeling. I
I'll
have a
deal
feeling
with it later, so it's fine. Um, yeah, what would you say? Your favorite track on the record?
it's tough, man. Because I have three five-star songs on this record. I have Radioactive, Man of a Thousand Faces, and Mr. Make Believe.
Hmm.
I have five four-star songs on this record.
Wow.
Uh,
Yeah.
I'm going to go with Radioactive just because I
Oh,
think this. Hmm?
I was gonna say Joe Perry also played guitar on Radioactive. Yeah.
Thought that might have been it, but I wasn't sure.
Yeah.
Um, I think Radioactive is a brilliant, brilliant start to the record.
Hmm.
Um, and this record really has a lot of different. Gene does a lot of different things with his voice on this record, and Radioactive is probably the closest. That and maybe Burn Up with Fever, the closest that you get to his demon persona. Um, I just Radioactive is probably the heaviest, maybe the most rock, rock track on the record.
Hmm.
I find it so catchy. So it's got such a groove to it. I love the melody. Um, and I like Man of a Thousand Faces and Mr. Make Believe because they are so different. Up until this point, Gene had done, he did Christine 16 with the softer voice, but we really hadn't heard him sing a lot like this. So it's really cool to hear him do See You Tonight and Man of a Thousand Faces and Mr. Make Believe.
Yeah.
Um, and spread out that way. But I got to go with Radioactive.
Okay.
But I love Man of a Thousand Faces and Mr. Make Believe too. But if you force me to pick one, I'm going to go with Radioactive.
So you mentioned the production on this, and
Yeah.
it's produced by Sean Delaney and Gene Simmons, and Sean, you know, I don't know the extent of Sean Delaney's production work outside of the Kiss thing. I don't know if he ever really branched out and became really a producer. I know he did some other stuff, but I mean, he kind of came up through the KISS organization. So he's kind of an
Mm-hmm.
in-house guy, right? And
Mm-hmm.
um, so I mean, it's not like they got like, a Bob Ezrin, to come in from the outside and really produce this. So it's kind of an in-house production in that sense. And I think of this album's production not so much in terms of the sonic quality that would be partially a matter of who engineered it, right? But I think in terms of the overall scope and sequence of the record, you're talking about Radioactive. How how can you think of that song without thinking of that weird intro? You know, you,
And that's part of the charm of it. That's
you
part of how it works as
right,
the
and
opening.
that's a production element, right? That's production from the sense of like, okay, how do we craft this intro that goes into this song, and how do we, because there's different angles on production, right? There's how do we bring the best performances out? That kind of producer. That's an Eddie Kramer type producer, right?
Mhm.
You get the Bob Ezrin type of producer, which is let's take this part of this song and scrap that part and connect it to this, and they rewrites the stuff. Um, I see this. I see the production of Gene's solo album almost like it's a concept album. You
Hmm.
go from that kind of weird, almost omen-like demonic opening into Radioactive, and by the time you get to the end of the album, it's like there's this like redemptive feel with When You Wish Upon a
Mhm.
Star. So I see it as an album production kind of a thing. I think it's great. Um, in
I agree,
in
and
in
some people say that you hear the beginning of the record and how the album starts, and then after Radioactive, and Burn Up with Fever, or you get let down because then Gene really goes soft. And I'm like, no, man, it's just that's the brilliance of the record.
Hmm.
Sequenced just about perfectly.
Yeah.
Um,
And the fact is now for some people they might see this as a peaks and valleys type of thing. I don't see it as peaks and valleys. I just see it as interesting detours as you're going
yeah.
along a path. So yeah.
If you just generally, I don't like Gene doing "See You Tonight" type songs, or I don't like him doing "A World Without Heroes." That's fine. I do, and I know you
Yeah.
do.
Hmm.
So if it's not your jam, it's not your jam. But for me, I'm like, there's no valleys on this record. This is
Right.
just a record, start to finish. And I like this record for reasons different than I like Aces or that I like Peters. I like them for different
Yeah.
reasons.
I did make a note, I mentioned a moment ago, Mitch Weissman, who had been in Beatlemania and he does backing vocals on this. I mentioned how he had done some co-writes on Animalize. I
Mhm.
jotted them down. He co-wrote Get All You Can Take, While the City Sleeps, Murder in High Heels, and he also has a co-write on Thief in the Night on Crazy Nights. So
Yeah,
just a side note on that.
pretty interesting because Animalize has nothing to do with Gene's solo album.
Nope. In fact, Gene was, notoriously kind of absent during a lot of that. So it's kind of a different thing. Um, yeah, okay. Are we ready to move on to Mr.
We're ready to
Paul
move on. We're
Stanley?
ready to move on. That was nice. I saw what you did there. We're ready to move on into
You
Paul.
know what? I didn't even realize it.
We just did that.
Okay. So move on. No, excuse me. Paul Stanley's solo album. My understanding is that this album was basically recorded about half of it in LA, about half of it in New York. There's two different rhythm sections basically in the album. But maybe not perfectly half and half. But Carmine Appice. By the way, um, those two guys, um, Vinny and Carmine,
Hmm.
they both pronounce their own last name differently, don't they?
I believe so, but
That's just weird. They just need to pick one and arm wrestle over it and figure
Dio
out what
always
they're.
Dio always called him Vinny Appice, so that's how I always called him. I figured, well, Dio
But
worked with him. He
yeah,
should.
Vinny Appice, but I've always heard Carmine Appice.
I have to, but
So
anyway.
yeah, whatever. If you're watching this and comment below.
Yeah, if Carmine talked to you and said no, here's how you pronounce it, or Carmine, if you're out there and you want to comment on, if you want to
Yeah,
let
but
us.
I've never heard Carmine Appice, but I've always Vinny Appice. But anyway, but Carmine played on "Take Me Away." Obviously, Bob Kulick is on the whole record,
Yeah,
and but
and
I
he does.
think yeah, but I mean, Paul Stanley produced the record pretty much by himself, with the exception of "Take Me Away," "It's All Right," "Love and Chains." Well, I should say about half of it. "Take Me Away," "It's All Right," "Love and Chains," and "Goodbyes" co-produced with Jeff Glicksman. So, um, but this album to me has the arguably the lowest point of all of the solo albums.
I know what it is. I can take a stab at it.
What is it?
Hold me, touch me.
Yes. I do think it has a great guitar solo.
I was going to say the best part of it is the solo. The solo is outstanding. It's a great.
Yeah. Yeah, the solo is great. I did see somewhere, I think Eddie Trunk had said that he's pretty sure that the guitar solo on Hold Me, Touch Me is actually Paul, not
I,
Bob Kulick.
I can hear that. I can hear that in some of the phrasing.
Hmm.
I wouldn't be.
Yeah. So, yeah, okay, but yeah, that's my least favorite song, probably of all of them. I would rather listen to Tossed and Turn, I think, than Hold Me, Touch Me. Hold Me, Touch Me just has way too much sap.
Cheese, sappy
It's
cheesiness.
just sappy cheesiness. It's just like it's just a little too much for me in that
And that
record.
was this. And
That
that was the
doesn't mean
single.
I hate it like to my core or anything like that, but I can easily skip it, you
And
know.
that was the single off this record.
Yes, it was.
I believe it was. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just full disclosure, it's my least favorite song on the record too. I gave it 3 stars.
I gave it two.
Okay.
It's like I actually dislike it, and
Right.
I don't hate it, but I don't really like it. It's like
Well, if you're listening to the record, you skip it.
depends on what format I'm listing. So like if I'm listing in my car, yeah,
Mm,
click. If I throw it on the turntable like a vinyl version of it, no, I let it roll. So it kind of depends on that stuff. But high points tonight you belong to me. Like
mhm.
wow, what an opener! Holy smokes! Like that's probably my favorite opener of. I mean, I it's better. I think I'd put that above Radioactive. I'd put it above Rip It Out. I I think Tonight You Belong to Me is a masterpiece. That's just so good, so good. And I put that right up there with Take Me Away together as one. I think that song is phenomenal. Um, th those are the two like kind of almost epic-y, kind of epic kind
Yeah,
of tunes. Um,
especially Take Me Away, especially of the
yeah,
two.
that definitely has a pretty epic feel to it. Which, by the way, as a side note, Michael Japp, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, or Yap, I don't know not his nationality necessarily, but he co-wrote Take Me Away, Ain't Quite Right, and Move On. And he also later co-wrote Saint and Sinner with Gene on Creatures.
Yeah, and which is one of my favorite songs on Creatures.
Yeah, sure, mine is too. So yeah, the other thing is, some of these other songs, like "It's All Right," I think "It's All Right" I think it's a really good song. The bridge in "It's All Right" is a lot like that in "Rise to It." If you ever, one of these days, if you think of it, listen to "It's All Right" and then and focus on the bridge, and then listen to "Rise to It."
I can hear it in my head right now. I
Can you?
get it. I
Yeah,
hadn't thought about it till just now, but I can hear it.
yeah. Um, I don't know when that hit me at some point, but at one point I was listening to it and I was like, wait a minute. Yeah. So you already said your low point was also Hold Me, Touch Me, right?
That's correct.
Yeah. I think the difficult thing is like to me the two like I mentioned Tonight You Belong to Me and Take Me Away kind of have these epic feel that kind of to them. And to me, that's what elevates those songs just a hair above some of the others. But I still love, like, I love Love in Chains.
Hmm.
It's just a great rock song.
Yeah.
I love how there's a bit of a juxtaposition between the melodies in the verses and the kind of the pre-chorus stuff. But then when you get to the chorus, it's just this
Yeah, it's just yeah, it's yeah,
very
it
just
hits
like the right on the
on the beat, on
it's
the
on the
beat.
beat, it's on the chord. The vocal doesn't like play over. It's not like a melody that runs over the chordal pattern. It just goes right just in
Yep.
line with the chordal pattern. And I think it's a great juxtaposition to the other parts of the song. I think that's what makes that song work really well. And I also love the bass line in Goodbye.
Oh, it's phenomenal.
God. And also talk about album closers. Goodbye, I think is a fantastic album closer. That, you know, Another album I used to put on at night and just listen. Actually, all three, Gene's, Paul's, and Peter's, were like nighttime listen to albums, whereas Ace's was just not. It was while you're driving around town
Hmm.
kind of an album. But I also love Ain't Quite Right. I think Ain't Quite Right is a great song. So solid record. I'd say my the weakest points on the record, definitely Hold Me, Touch Me. Move On, I think is a good song, but it's not, I don't think it's great. If that, it's nothing that like blows my mind. So
Yeah.
yeah. In terms of high points,
My favorite songs on the record are "Goodbye" and "Wouldn't You Like to Know Me." And if push comes to shove, I'd probably say "Goodbye" is my favorite song on the album. That bass line is so cool.
you remember the bass line's phenomenal on that, which I don't have in my notes who played bass on the album? Do you?
Off the top of my head, I don't know.
Okay, okay. You also remember the original? I think the original CD pressing was misprinted. It was uh, "Wouldn't You Like Me to Know,"
Yes.
which is
I was gonna say that too. Yeah, I think I do recall that.
yeah.
I think that's an amazing song. I think that's a fantastic song.
Wouldn't you like
Um,
to know me?
yes. I also really like It's All Right, Love in Chains, and Tonight You Belong to Me. Those are all solid
Mhm.
records. Just
Yeah.
I like Ain't Quite Right because it's different. It's
Hmm.
a little bit quirky. It's not like something. His voice on this album is impeccable. I mean, his performance is phenomenal. He's really getting into becoming at this point just a fantastic vocalist, I think, and I think it really showcases on this record quite well. And a
I
song
agree.
like Right really shows, well, all the songs do, but Ain't Quite Right really, he brings it down, you know. And but there's still some very emotive points in the song. There's a lot of light and shade on that song, which makes it really cool since you mentioned that song. Um,
Yeah, I think you're right that Paul's vocal performance on this album just has a there's a diversity of his vocal performances here that you just don't quite get on just the standard Kiss records. And the thing I really like about Ain't Quite Right is just how laid back of a song that it is. And it just it's almost this contemplative thing.
yeah.
It's just something's just not right here. This just isn't working. So like the lyric matches the laid back mood of the song, this kind of contemplative, this ain't working for me, hon. Kind of a
but
from
when
the
you get to
lyric,
the
but then at the very end, it just elevates just a little bit with those harmony vocals and the beat kicks in right at the end.
I would say that I was going to say the end of the song is a sense of urgency because the guitar solo kicks in during the outro, during the fade out.
Yeah.
So the song is really kind of, like you said, contemplative and mellow. And then there's a little bit more urgency. It gets ramped up at the end, which I think is a nice contradiction to what the majority of the song is. I think that's really good songwriting.
Yeah.
And I think on this record he demonstrated because he does a lot of things songwriting wise that he really hadn't done on Kiss records before this.
Hmm.
So he branches out really well as a writer, as they all do on these records. I think maybe with the exception of Ace, because Ace's record is really start to finish a rock album. But Paul branches out as a writer and as a vocalist on this record, I think,
Hmm. Hmm.
and he does a phenomenal job with it.
So, okay, with that in mind, let's just work this backwards then. You asked a few months ago, is there like a song on each of these records that you would have been cool to hear Kiss play?
Yeah,
Obviously,
or,
they
or,
did.
or record, or record.
Okay, either way. Um, it's going to throw a bit of a wrench into my thinking, but now let's obviously we got to exclude from that Move On because they did play it
Right?
on the Dynasty tour. So, other than Move On, what's the song that you would say you'd like to hear Kiss play, either like you say, play live or record?
My pick was Love and Chains.
That was my pick. Love in Chains. I think
Yeah,
that would have been cool. That would have been great.
I think it would with them all doing backing vocals.
Yeah.
I think it would have been great.
Yeah, and the other thing, and my thinking on this is like something that's realistic. Like to me, it's really unrealistic to imagine them playing like "Take Me Away."
Right. Yeah, I did the same thing. I
Yeah,
picked a song that I think it would actually be something they could have pulled off. They
right.
could have on the Kiss record, or they could have played Love and Chains instead of Move On the
Yeah,
Dynasty.
yeah. Now, obviously, for let's see, Gene's album, they played Radioactive.
Yep.
They also, of course, later on did "See You Tonight" on MTV Unplugged,
Right.
which worked really, really well, I think.
Yes, it's a very good version of that song.
But this album becomes a difficult. This is difficult because if it's not Radioactive and it's not "See You Tonight" Unplugged, what the
You,
heck else could they play?
well, and you can't pick "See You in Your Dreams" because they already did
Because
record.
they did a version of that right on Rock and Roll Over. So what do
I
you
picked,
say?
picked one. I picked "Burning Up with Fever." Yeah, I mean, That'd be kind because I think that'd be interesting. That song has kind of got a bounce to it and a weird groove to it, and I think it would be cool to see almost like a bit of a shuffle at points to it. Um, I think it would have been cool to see Kiss do something like "Burning Up with Fever,"
Well,
and
you
and hearing
know,
the guys do gang vocals during the chorus would be kind of cool.
I'm having trouble hearing it.
Really?
Yeah, I can't. So here I'm going to break. When you said either record a version or play live,
Mm-hmm.
I know they recorded a version of See You in Your Dreams, but they never, as far as I know, they never played it live. So
Got it.
I'm gonna go with See You in Your Dreams and just play it live. That would be the other one for me.
Okay. 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 That's
Um,
cool.
as far as Ace Frehley, obviously they played New York Groove,
Yep.
which okay, fine, but I'm gonna go with Rip It Out.
I
Just
me too. No, no, there's no question.
yeah. In fact, frankly, I mean, I get why they did New York Groove and everything, but come on, they should have played Rip It Out. That would have been great to see Kiss play Rip It Out.
That would have been phenomenal.
Now, and the Pete album, I mean, from the Pete album, the whole thing. I mean, Kiss should have just played the entire Peter Criss record start to finish.
Well, I can't argue with that, but we got to pick one song. So
Okay.
I whittled
Obviously.
mine.
By the way, that was a sarcasm alert there for okay. But um
Well, I'm just going to pick. This is again. There's not a lot of stuff on here that I think they, like you said, it's not really realistic. Like I'm not,
right.
they're not going to roll out. They're not going to roll out easy thing, right?
No.
So I'm picking hooked on rock and roll.
That's
That's my
I was gonna say that too. Yeah.
that's my pick.
Yeah. I don't know if it would have come across very well, but
Wouldn't you like to hear it though?
well, yeah, of course. Okay. All right. So all right, are we ready to do our
Yeah,
countdown here?
let's do the countdown, and then let's talk about where these actually fall within the Kiss catalog, and then maybe a couple of closing comments or so would be a good way
Okay.
to.
Now, so this, by the way, I'm just going to say this. I I did not have I, I had no idea how this was going to pan out because,
Me
like I said at the beginning of this, I actually really like all the Kiss solo albums for pretty much different reasons. And on on any given day, I could probably rank them a little differently because I might be in a slightly different mood. You know, if I'm in an ace mood when I'm ranking this stuff, I might have, things might have ended up a little bit different. Now, somebody out there who's a big Kiss fan that can't stand like Gene's album or thinks Peter's album is trash or whatever, well, no matter what we say about them, no matter where we rank them, they're going to disagree with us, and that's fine. God bless you. But the the way this panned out, both in terms of the ranking of the four Kiss or the four Salams and in how they kind of rank amongst the Kiss catalog, man, there's going to be some Kiss fans out there that are going to think I'm nuts. So,
Same with me, probably.
all right. So for me, okay, or you want to do the number four spot?
Yep,
Okay, coming in at number four for me was Ace.
I had Paul number 4.
I am shocked that your Paul's was number four for you. Because I always thought Paul was your favorite Kiss member. I
Well, a
mean,
lot of for a lot of in a lot of respects, he was and is. Yeah, but that's I'll have some a more commentary once we get done with the countdown to kind of flush a little bit of this. I don't want to spend.
okay. Yeah. Okay. So that number four, number three is Paul's.
I have Gene at number 3.
Okay. Number two.
I have
Ooh.
Pete.
And then number one. Wow.
So, can I make a couple comments?
Yes.
First, the difference between number 1 and number 4 is about 5 percentage points, 5.5 percentage points. The difference between Peter and Gene is 1%, 1 percentage point.
Hmm.
And I'm going to say something that might not make a lot of sense, and you may not make sense to you either. But Ace's record came in first in my grading, but I think Gene's is actually my favorite. If that makes sense.
Yeah, go ahead and
I
explain that.
I find myself going to Gene's record more often. Earlier, I said I like these records for different reasons.
Hmm.
So I find myself wanting to hear the Gene material more often than I want to hear the Ace material, even though Ace's record graded better. Ace's record came in at 84%, a little over that. Gene's was at 80. Peters was 81. Paul's was almost 79%. So they're all very, very close.
And that gets into the issue about how do you rank something that is subjective. And
Right,
and somebody might reasonably say, well, your system is flawed because you're just putting a number, what makes a song a five or a four and a half or whatever. But when you're ranking albums that you really like, you're quantifying them anyway because you're saying one comes in ahead of another one in some sort of
right.
order, which is numerical. That's also just kind of arbitrary. So I get what you're saying when you apply this system, and no system would be perfect because you're trying to quantify the qualitative. But I get
Mhm.
it. I get it. It's like, oh, okay. When I go through each of these songs, they ended up ranking slightly higher on the aggregate, but the albums are so different. So it's like it's a little bit like apples and oranges in a certain sense, right? It's like I like apples, I like oranges, but maybe this is a better apple than this is an orange, but on the whole, maybe I tend to like oranges more often,
Right.
if that makes
So
any sense.
yeah. So where do these records fall? If we're going to put them in the Kiss catalog, there's 20 studio Kiss records, not counting the live albums. We've done those. Where would these slot in for you in the Kiss
Okay.
catalog? I'll
And
tell
this
you
is
where
this is
my,
also where a lot of diehard Kiss fans would be scratching their heads and saying that I'm nuts. Okay, you're so ready for this?
me too. I'll tell you what mine are after you tell me yours.
Okay, I'll put it this way because I did not bring in all my Kiss records to do this, but I can
I
just
didn't. I'll just tell
explain it.
you.
So I'll just say it this way. So Gene's, Peters, and Paul's all ended up in the top 10.
Me too.
Aces, oh, well, then all of them did for you
No,
because
no, I can just I take that back. Go ahead and finish. I'm
okay.
sorry.
So yeah, Gene's, Peters, and Paul's all ended up in the top 10. Aces would have come in at number 12. So
Okay.
just out of the top 10. So
Okay.
okay. Um, so starting with Ace, it would go like this: Ace Frehley, then Animalize, then Monster, then Hotter Than Hell. Keeping in mind that Animalize, Monster, and Hotter Than Hell all tied with the exact same percent and 0.3% difference than Aces.
Okay.
So those are effectively all tied. I like those albums pretty much equal. Then
Mhm.
Paul, then Rock and Roll Over, then Peter, then Dynasty, then Jeans, then Destroyer, then Unmasked, and then Creatures. And even and Unmasked and Creatures too, where those were like within a percent. So they're overall talking really, really, really close albums. So
Yeah, I did. I wrote down where they fell. I didn't put down what they were next to or whatever. I mean, I'd have to go pull up my numbers to look at that. But for me, Aces came in at number four out of the in the whole Kiss catalog. His would slot in at number four.
and for me, it was Jeans was at number 4.
Peters was number nine.
Okay.
Gene was number 10, and Paul was 14.
Ah, okay.
So three in the top 10 and one just outside the
It's
top
it's
10.
it's interesting. We have different results, but we both had 3 of them in the top 10, and then we
Which
had one just kind of out of the top 10.
yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, okay. It's interesting, for music geeks, I guess, or Kiss geeks. It's interesting. So,
Oh,
um,
actually, no, I can tell you. I'm sorry. I'm going to expand on that. I have the notes right here. So
oh,
just because you might be curious. Number four, Aces would slot right in between. Would be right after um, Unmasked and right before Lick It Up. I mean, just a percentage point right in there.
yeah.
Peters at number nine goes right. It would be he would lose a tiebreaker with Dynasty,
Hmm.
and that fit in right after Rock and Roll Over. So go Rock and Roll Over, Peter Criss, Dynasty. Gene would be right after Asylum in Rock and Roll Over. And he would slot in right after Peter, coming in at number 10, push those records down another notch. And Paul at 14 would be um, right after, what do I have? It's, yeah, again, these are like, you get into like tenths and the 100ths of a percent, would be beating out the debut album
Hmm.
barely by less than a point. So yeah, it's an interesting exercise to see where they would fall
Yeah.
in.
Well, and the thing to me that creating this system makes listening to these albums kind of fresh again. It's just a
Yeah,
different way of looking at them. So, um, at any rate, if you're still with us, thanks for tuning in. Uh, like, subscribe, hit the little bell for notifications. Please put comments if you find this to be just kind of absolutely crazy and you think we're nuts. That's cool. Everybody's entitled to their own point of view. And if there's anybody else out there that actually thinks Peter's album is good, then I'd like to hear from you. In the meantime, let's do a quick little nod. Brent and I and a few other guys play in a musical project that we call Underlords of the Overworld, which is a fancy way of saying a bunch of nobodies. And we've done a range of recordings. It's kind of a conceptual project that has music. Some of it's instrumental, some of it is not. It started off as an instrumental project, and our bass player, who writes under the name H. Prescott Lemon, has written an extensive series of backstories, which are 99.9% farcical hooiness and
yeah. You
loads
said
of loads of fun. And his books are available. You can H. Prescott Lemon, Underlords of the Overworld. You can find them on Amazon.com. They're really fun. They're easy reads. If you like to read fantasy kind of goofball stuff, he also has a another series in the same universe called the OAO, the Ordo Abstrusis Oculus, which is a secret society. We actually did a song with that title on our newest record, which you can find on Bandcamp and Spotify. The album's called Lottery of Your Life. There's a single version of the song Ordo Obstrusus Oculus that has Blaze Bayley from Iron Maiden doing a guest vocal on it. So, if you're one of those folks that likes to support independent artists, we are independent artists, and if you check it out and you like it, great. We'd love to have your support. If you check it out and you hate it, God bless you. That's great too. So, at any rate, Brent, do you have anything else you want to say before we sign off?
no, other than this is a lot of fun, and we'll certainly get out, the solo albums that they did outside of Kiss.
Yep.
That would be a fun episode to do, hitting those records.
Yep, and there's other stuff we got, in the works. We're hoping to get an episode on the Rat catalog with an old school friend of ours. Um, who, well, we'll hold off on who the identity of that individual is after a bit. But we're also talking about doing something with the Yes Epics because we're big prog fans. Gosh, what else? Captain
Captain Beyond.
Beyond. There's a loads of stuff. So we took a little bit of a hiatus, but we're kind of starting to get back into our groove here. So thanks for checking us out. Like, subscribe, comment, blah 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 blah. Okay, ciao. Boy, the funny thing is about this. They changed this on me, and I have to figure out how to stop recording. Oh, there it is. There it is. Okay. Thanks. Bye, guys.